guys, welcome to yet another episode of Microsoft ERP Beginners Tutorial Series. In the previous episode, we did cover some of the prerequisites that are required for creation of a purchase requisition, and we have completed all the prerequisites. So do watch my previous episode if you have not watched it. It's a continuation of the previous episode. And in this episode, we will now be going ahead and creating a purchase requisition record in the system. So with that note, let's get started. So I'm in the procurement and sourcing purchase requisition and all purchase requisition section. As we already discussed, this purchase requisition is a global form, and it is global record. So it will display the purchase requisition created in all the legal entity in the system. More details on the purchase requisition we've already discussed in the previous episode. If you missed to watch it, watch it. Okay, so now let's get started with our first purchase requisition creation. The new button is enabled. That's because we have linked our user to the employee as we did in the previous episode, and we already created a purchase requisition workflow as well. Okay, so now let's get started with the purchase requisition. Click on the new button, and I'm creating a purchase requisition for a general supplier. So PR for general supply. If you remember, the conditions of our workflow is whenever the reason code is general supply or renovation, only then the purchase requisition workflow will be triggered to one of my manager, that is one of my user, which is myself. So that is going to be the condition of our workflow. So that's why I'm going to make sure that this purchase requisition is created for a general supply, and I'm going to choose my purchase requisition reason code as a general supply as well, so that my workflow is triggered properly. So the request date is automatically changed to today's date. So this is the purchase requisition number that's coming from the number sequence. So just click OK, and the purchase requisition will be created. So that's the purchase requisition. By default, the preparer is my name because this is being fetched from the employee that is tagged to my user ID. At the moment, the Mohammed Yasser is an employee tagged to my user, and that's why the system automatically pulls me myself as a preparer in the system. A preparer necessarily need not be the person who's actually needs a purchase requisition. The preparer can prepare a purchase requisition on a behalf of a requester as well. As I mentioned one example in a previous episode, where a preparer is belonging to a headquarters location, but he's preparing on a behalf of a requester from a different legal entity or different company, right? So the lines can be created specific to a different company, and the preparer is now helping the requester accordingly, right? So we can do that. So how do we achieve it is we have some additional setup that we need to turn on. So let's see that now. So here I have a preparer who is a Mohammed Yasser. I'm going to add a line here. So as soon as I add a line, the requester is also my name because I do not have a requester setup. So assuming that I want to create this on a behalf of another requester from a different company or from the same company, then I need to first set up the requester setup. At the moment, the requester is myself because I do not have the proper setup that are required for the requester. So how do we do the setup? So we need to get into the procurement and sourcing module. Under policies, let me see where the policies are. This is product information. Get into the procurement and sourcing and look for the policies section. So it's here, and the purchase requisition permission that I'm highlighting on the screen is where you set up. So get into the purchase requisition permission, and my preparer name is Mohammed Yasser. So that's my name, and the requester for me, I can assign some requesters. So let me choose a requester Jody. So which means that I can create on behalf of Jody, and I can create some purchase requisition on behalf of Charlie. I can now create a purchase requisition on a behalf of Ted. Let me add one more requester. So I can also now create a purchase requisition on behalf of Luke. So that's the very simple setup that you need to do. And then go back to your purchase requisition, and you will now be able to see all the requesters. So I can change the requester to Jody. So in this case, Jody is from the USMF legal entity. Based on the Jody employment history, system automatically fetches the company, relevant company. So Jody is from USMF legal entity. So I can now add a chair or a table as an item and order a purchase requisition line on behalf of Jody. So the workflow will now be triggered to the Jody supervisor or to a specific user. In this case, our workflow setup is always to a specific user. But if your workflow setup is based on the managerial hierarchy, let's say this is the workflow, and at the moment my workflow setup is based on the user. So that is it's based on the user assignment at the moment, but you can change if you want to change it to the hierarchy, managerial hierarchy. And if you wanted to make sure that your managerial hierarchy is either a preparer or a requester, so you need to choose accordingly, So if you choose preparer always, then the PR will go to your manager if you're choosing a managerial hierarchy in your workflow. But if you're choosing a requester, then that means that the system always consider this requester field, and now the workflow will be triggered to Jody's manager. Okay, so this is only applicable if you're following the assignment type of hierarchy, but in our case we are following the user, so it's always going to this particular user and this time limit, and this is going to be the completion policy, right? So in our case the hierarchy won't be effective, but I'm just highlighting this point to you just in case you're using a managerial hierarchy in your workflow. They need to be mindful of making the setup proper so that it follows the proper workflow, right? So this is the requester and this is a legal entity. I can keep changing the legal entity based on the requester. So let me now change back to my own user so that I can demonstrate some additional stuff. So as soon as I change to my own user, I see that the legal entity is also changed to ADC motor because of my employment history is only with the ADC motors. And if I click drop down, I will also not see any other legal entity here because my employee record is only associated with the ADC motors. Just in case if you want to associate your employment record with the multiple legal entity, then all you need to do is just get into the HR module. I'm a bit fast because you can always pause the video and or slow down the video and watch it again. So yeah, so now let's get into the employee record. So under the employee record, and you have this, and there's something called as an employment history. Click on it and you will see the employment history at the moment is only for the ADC motors. So let me create another employment history for DMF legal entity. Yeah, that one. And start date as from the October 1st, and just create an employment history. So if I have two employment history, so let me close this purchase requisition, or just first remove the line and close the purchase requisition. Let me create a quick one, another purchase requisition. General supplies, requested date is today. Okay, let's now quickly create another one. So let's add a line, that's my name. You will see there are two legal entities because of my employment history, but at the moment it defaults to ADC because I am in the ADC legal entity. If I try to create a purchase requisition with my user in the DMF legal entity, the buying legal entity will automatically default to DMF because of my employment history. Okay, so that's a very important thing that you need to understand, and why the defaults the legal entity here, and comes from the employment history setup. And now let me quickly choose an item. And I see that there's only one item available in the purchase requisition, but we know that our legal entity have so many items. But why is that there's only one item assigned? Because there's only one item assigned with a proper procurement category. If you remember, we have created a default procurement category and made a procurement category associations in some of our past episodes and some of our very beginning episodes. So that procurement category needs to be properly assigned to different items for us to see the items in the purchase requisition. So let's quickly get into the get into the released products and assign some of the released product with the procurement category so that we can see them. At the moment, only this has a procurement category. If you check this, you will see that it has a procurement category, but not the other items. Like for example, the vehicle item doesn't have a procurement category. So let me go and add a procurement category, which is a vehicle. This is our default procurement category, and this is actually a vehicle or maybe a car. Okay, let me go back. Let's add another procurement category, and this is a spare part related with engine. So let me select this and get into the spare parts related to clutch, I think. So let's check the clutch, and let's do it for a couple of more items. Last one, and so select it. And so spare part, select, do it for the last one. This one, category, sorry, spare part, brake. Okay, save it, and now you go back and you can see there are more items that's displayed over here. Okay, because now we have procurement category. Procurement category is again mandatory, and it's also possible that you do not want to choose an item, rather your procurement category, you have a procurement category like cleaning or labor service. You can just choose the only the procurement category alone. You don't need to choose an item in such cases. Okay, anyways, let me remove this and add again. Let me now choose an item instead of just category. So let me choose the alloy wheel to start with. So at the moment the unit price is not displayed because the unit price setup is not enabled. It needs to be enabled in the policies. It's a separate topic. We will discuss that in detail when we discuss about the policies related with the purchase requisition. It's a very important topic, but we will cover it later. And it will automatically populate the vendor account just in case if you have a default vendor in the item master under the purchase tab, or if you have any trade agreement set up for a specific warehouse or site, then even the vendor account will populate from the trade agreement setup. So there are various areas where the vendor account populates automatically. So at the moment, I think I have trade agreement set up for this particular vendor for this item, or maybe this item master is having this vendor mapped under the default as the default vendor. So that's the reason I'm automatically populated. But there are multiple scenarios where in some cases you do not choose your vendor because you do not really know your vendor. So in such cases you do not choose your vendor. In such cases you will use something called as request for quotation, which gets enabled once my workflow gets triggered. So request for quotation is where you will request for the quotation from 10 different vendors, and finally you choose one particular vendor and then you reject all other vendor, and once the purchase requisition is accepted and the vendor which is got chosen automatically flows in from the RFQ document into the purchase requisition line, and with the price which got selected, so everything will auto populate from the RFQ document. So that's another scenario. We will try that out in a separate episode when we discuss about the RFQ in detail. For now, I'm going to choose my vendor account to start with. I'm going to assume that in this case, I really know who my vendor is. Okay, so I'm choosing my account here in this case. And I didn't enable my unit price setup, so that's why my the prices are not coming in, but that's fine for now. And I'm getting a warning. Let me just remove this and just put it. The warning is because I have not filled in my inventory, so I'll show you how to do that. Just that you need to choose the item, and you have something called as inventory section. Oh, not here. I think it's under the purchase requisition line. Dimension, inventory dimension. Choose this, save the setup and say okay. Okay, if at all there are any trade agreements available for this warehouse, it will automatically display. Yeah, I got it. So there is a trade agreement available for this particular warehouse. So the unit prices are now populated. So of course the unit price can even be disabled in the policies. There is a separate setup. We will view this later. At the moment it's not disabled. So from the trade agreement line, I'm getting the unit price populated. Okay. Yeah, so that is the a quick show on the purchase. In this case, I have already defaulted this to this vendor because I know that I always have only one vendor in this example. So I'm not going to go for a RFQ in this example. I'm going to skip the RFQ process. So once you do all of that and say save, the workflow will be enabled. So get into the workflow, submit the workflow. So as soon as you submit the workflow, your request for quotation will be enabled, just in case if you want to use it, right? In this case, we are going to skip the request for quotation. Yeah, it's enabled, but we'll skip it for now. It is also possible for creating a new workflow in such a way that whenever you do not choose your vendor, then that means that requires a purchase, a request for quotation. So you can make sure that those workflow goes to a separate person, because that person need to validate the request for quotation and make sure the request for quotation goes through, and then he needs to approve the workflow, right? Even such changes workflow can also be made, but that is a discussion for a separate episode. We will take it separately. If it's confusing, do not think too much about the RFQ for time being. Okay, so now let's keep it very simple. So now we are going to go ahead and this workflow is already executed, and at the moment this is with the approval for the manager, and as a manager I will get the notification and I can go ahead and check the purchase requisition, and if I like the purchase, if I am okay with the purchase requisition, I can now go ahead and approve it. So as soon as I approve the purchase requisition, based on the setup or the purchasing policies, two different things can happen. One is the purchase order status either changed to approve or it changed to closed. So which means two options are, one is automatic PO will be released automatically from the purchase requisition. In such cases, the status of the purchase requisition will change to closed. Another scenario is a manual purchase order needs to be released by us manually. In such cases, this status will be changed to, I believe, approved. So let's check what is the thing in our case. So let's just keep refreshing so that a workflow goes through and gets executed. I believe in our case, it is not an automatic purchase order release. It's going to be manual purchase order. So yeah, so it changes to approved. So which means that the purchase order is not yet released. So if you see in this section, the purchase order is not filled, right? Even the purchase requisition is not raised. So that's also empty. So this is also empty because the purchase order is not created automatically. So if the purchase order is not created automatically, then the status changes to approved. So so how do we now go do it is, let me use another tab. So in the purchase procurement and sourcing, under the purchase requisition, there is a separate area which is called as release approved purchase requisitions. So if I go in here, I will see all my approved purchase requisitions which are not released with a purchase order. So this is the one which I've just created, right? So the purchase order is not yet released. So if I click on the new purchase order button, the purchase order will be now released against the purchase requisition. So the purchase requisition is gone from the queue because the purchase requisition status is no more approved. If I refresh it, it will be changed to closed. Changed to closed, and you will also see that your purchase order that is created, which is the same number, is also displaying over here, which is nothing but it is your purchase order document. So the purchase requisition is itself is specific to all the legal entities, is global, but the line is specific to only one legal entity, which is ADC Motors. So whichever purchase order that gets created will only be created into that specific legal entity of the purchase requisition line. So at the moment, this purchase order document is specific to the legal entity because purchase order document is not global. So this is how we create a purchase requisition and release a purchase requisition to the purchase order. In the future episode, we'll see some of the automated process on how do we make sure that it gets released automatically using the policies. I can just give you a glimpse of it so that even if you're not watching my other episode, you will at least know what I'm talking about. So it is actually from the purchasing policies section. You need to create your own purchase policy for your legal entity. At the moment, I think this is a purchasing policy of USMF because only USMF is selected. Firstly, you need to select your legal entity into the purchasing policy, and then you go here, and then if you get in here and you check this out, you need to make sure that the automatic is selected. At the moment, automatic is selected, but unfortunately this purchasing policy is not activated against the ADC Motor legal entity, and that's why it is behaving by default as a manual purchase order release. So that's why the purchase order got released only manually. So that's about the purchase requisition cycle. In the next episode, we will look into the process of purchase, that is RFQ and other areas within the purchase requisition. Hope you enjoyed my episode. See you again in next episode.